Great. I mean, there really isn't that much content out there around neurodiversity, not from an adult's point of view, at least. Sophie's from East London, just trying to hear a voice rather than a bunch of online tests. No, I know that fully. Waiting for a doctor to get an appointment related to this, or want to know what to assume I am. Yep. Just so you all know what to expect, I can't possibly tell you if you are or aren't neurodiverse. But what I can do is give you an understanding about how wide the spectrum is and the type of things people will be looking for. If you've attended any of my other webinars, you would have known that I've done one on like, am I dyslexic? Am I autistic? Am I ADHD? And the goal of these isn't to diagnose you. It's more about to get that conversation started in your head and to ask yourself if you think it's worth going to the GP or a specialist. Yeah, you like, as one of you mentioned, you can absolutely do online quizzes. We even have them on our website. They're good up until a point. The thing which makes them good is that they give you a starting point. The bad thing about them, though, is you can interpret those questions in so many different ways. And if it comes out moderately dyslexic, what does that mean? Moderately, aren't we all somehow? So hopefully today you can ask more questions, and we'll keep this quite an informal session. Esther, I'm a neurodiverse family member, so hope to learn more and hope it's okay that I join you today. Absolutely. I will be talking to all of you as if you are all neurodiverse or looking to find out. But if that doesn't include you, just answer from your relative or person you support point of view. So yeah, EI, who doesn't know us, exceptional individuals. We support the spectrum, dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, and a lot more, which you're going to learn about today. So a bit about us. I do this every session, but it's good to make sure we're all on the same page. We have been going for about 5 years now, and we support anyone who comes under the terminology or bracket of neurodiverse, whether or not you're diagnosed or not. And we also work with corporates. So maybe you're looking to get a high-end job and you think there's no way I'm going to get this job because unfortunately I'm going to be unconsciously discriminated against. We might be able to help you get a foot in the door, or at least point you in the right direction about what companies are inclusive, which ones are not, which ones are getting there, which ones to look out for. It's really not as simple as they're good, they're bad, but it's better to have a consultation with someone than not at all. And what makes us really unique is that we are neurodiverse. Our team, 80% of us all have something or other. And as you today, me and April are both neurodiverse, as well as I know a lot of you in this room already are. But I think what you'll find really interesting is that if you are diagnosed, you normally will get diagnosed with like one thing, but neurodiversity doesn't really work like that. It's if you have one, you're very likely to have something else just because of the way that your brain processes information. So let me quickly define for you, what do we mean when we say the word neurodiverse? Neurodiverse is not mental illness. So that's the first thing, what it's not. Neurodiverse is not being bad at something. Neurodiversity is the fluctuation of ability. So this graph shows an example of just one person, but obviously your skills can be different depending who you are. But let's say this person, they are really good at maths. You can see they've got a nice high spike here. They're not so creative. They're quite good at decision making. And now they have those spikes. Now, as human beings, all of us have these types of spikes. But people who are neurodiverse tend to have them to far greater extents. Now, in the past, we only ever focused on the negatives. But today, we are going to focus on the positives as well. Okay, so that's what we mean by neurodiverse. Neurodiversity, everyone. Neurodiverse, neurodivergent, just special people like us. Though, I'll be honest with you, the term special does make me cringe a bit, so let's avoid that. Now, we are going to be looking at as many of these as we possibly can today. It's going to be a real touch of the iceberg, but rather than going through one by one, which will take you several weeks, which I'm very grateful that a lot of you have done, I know not everyone has that luxury. So today we're going to be looking at dyscalculia, dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, Tourette's, as well as a couple other ones that aren't on here. And say if some of you have been diagnosed with dyslexia, it's very likely that you could be dyspraxic as well. Not guaranteed, but the likelihood does show to be double that of a neurotypical person. If you're likely to have one, you'll have another. The science is still out why that might be, but from most perspective, think of it like a big old spectrum. And neurodiversity is just how the brain functions and the frequencies. So the labels aren't so helpful in terms of a definitive way. They're more of a rough guideline to how your brain functions and how it processes information. So if you think of it from that perspective, it's not so much of a leap to realize that you could have other characteristics that are associated with a different condition / disorder. But do bear in mind that the definition of what counts as neurodiversity is continuously changing. It used to just refer to autism, and then it referred to the others, and then the others. It's because I think we're starting to reevaluate what we mean by disability. Disability is something which puts you at disadvantage to society, but a lot of the time we see it as something which is inherently bad, where a lot of the things we're going to be talking about today do not have to be inherently bad. Sometimes the negatives are related to society rather than the condition itself. So, am I neurodiverse? Short answer, yes. Long answer, let's see what you're most likely to resonate with. Remember, I am not a doctor. I just work with people who are neurodiverse every day and am neurodiverse. Please go to your GP or professional if you'd really want to hit home and find out for a fact. So dyslexia. Dyslexia is a condition that relates to phonologics, so reading. A lot of the time it can relate to handwriting and spelling, but most commonly it comes to reading. Now, it's incredibly common. 1 in 10 people have dyslexia. So just looking at this chat already, it's guaranteed there's people with dyslexia. Now, dyslexia, only about 1% of dyslexics cannot read or write. The vast majority absolutely can. So we're going to do a few exercises just to get a flavor of what people might be looking for when you go to get diagnosed for dyslexia. First one is, do you get similar words mixed up? If so, what? I always struggle to think of these things on the spot, but I'm always blurring words together. So I'll be thinking of 2 separate things and my brain is working faster than I would like it to, and then the words get joined. Trying to think of an example. Well, I don't know. I might say something like my leg hurts, but instead I'll be like legord. I'll smash the words together. Or there might be instances where I meant to say dog, but I say God, or I'll just kind of like slip words up. Yeah. One of you noticed. Do you mean words? That was done on purpose. Genuinely, it was on purpose, because you see the words like works and word, they're completely different words, yet because they look similar in terms of like how they're written, really easy to get mixed up. Dysgraphia and Dysgraphia, yeah. I read works as word. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you may have actually just read it as words, didn't even realize there was a mistake in it. So this is something that a lot of people look for dyslexics. Absolutely can read, but the way that the brain reads and processes information may result in mistakes being made. And it might seem like a deficit, but if you think, it's actually a really good thing, because what it is, it's like, okay, you don't have all the information, but you're able to work around it and carry on. It's actually a very efficient way of overcoming small barriers. The downside, however, comes when, with our very like ones and zeros life, we're looking for a right or wrong answer, and our magic ability of skipping words doesn't always work out. Okay, we've got nip and tick, maybe. Misread cloth, gowns, and cloth and clowns. Think like that. Perfect. I do not think I have dyslexia. I only mix words when I'm really tired and quite infrequently. Yeah, it's not for everyone. Or if you're drunk, that also happens. But it's just because there's like slight delays in the brain, and the information is either trickling through or is all coming out at once, and it kind of like collides. Next one, I want you to all to try and sound out these words. And this is an example of how dyslexics might read differently when it comes to sounding out individual letters. So the first one is the easiest one. Incomprehensibilities. So incomprehensibilities is when you can't understand something. And apparently this is the longest word that is in common use. So this is one of the words which is very frequent to misunderstand. When most people learn to read, for instance, like in, hence, they'll break words up. Whereas people with dyslexia, they learn to read completely different, but they, for myself, I'll read words in like images. So if I've seen the word before, I know what it means. So I'll be like incomprehensibilities. And because there's quite a lot of words, my brain finds it really difficult to like put together. The next one is a much smaller word. And this word doesn't have to be long for your brain to still struggle with the pronunciations, mainly because it just doesn't follow the same rules that you have kind of programmed in your head. So slightly shocked sound, like those words, or things that if you ever watched read comic books and they'd always kind of sound out like a pam, bow, smash, those sorts of things are difficult to spell. And it's because how often do you see them written out? Not very often. So the brain doesn't have its own kind of like memory of how they're spelled, regardless of how big or complex the word is. And the last one is a beast of a word. I'll give it a go. Hippotomostros equipid. No idea. But what I love about this word is, ironically, it's the fear of long words. So not great, right? It's like the word dyslexia, which so many people find really ironic, that it's quite a hard word to spell for people who might struggle with spelling. So just to really say, if you're not sure if not you have dyslexia, dyslexia is not being able to read or write. Dyslexia is more about the way you read and write is done in an unconventional way. And this is normally really apparent in primary school because you are being taught to read in one way, a one-size-fits-all model. And if you try to teach that way to someone who is dyslexic and do not know they're dyslexic, they're going to run into troubles. And the best thing you can do is try to find another method. This is why most people refer to neurodiversity as a very entry level or very junior condition, but it's not. It's just as you become adults, you learn different coping mechanisms and different strategies to find your kind of own route. All right, moving on to dyspraxia. Dyspraxia, great one. It's as common as dyslexia, 1 in 10 roughly, but it's less known. Dyspraxia refers to motor coordination. So remember, dyslexia is how the brain interprets words in the head. Dyspraxia is the physical, think of it like physical dyslexia. So yes, there's a delay, but the delay isn't just with vocals or processing. It's about movement as well. Jade said clumsy. Yeah, originally it was known as the clumsy child syndrome. And, mean, but the reason why it got that is that people with dyspraxia can struggle with coordination. They can struggle with spatial awareness, like bumping into things. You should have seen me when I was having to go on a virtual reality thing the other day. It was horrible. It can also like riding bikes, ballet, sports, anything which requires you to have like that depth perception or that quick response, because the signal from your brain is like, okay, there's a ball coming to my head and it's taking its time to process. And in the time it takes to process, but it doesn't just have to be physical sports. It can also be with communication. So we're having a conversation and you ask me a question which is thought-provoking. I have the answer in my head, but in order for that idea to get to my head, I've got to then think of it, like convert it into another language almost. and then kind of send it to me. And that takes extra time. So there may be a delay. And that delay can be enough that individuals might think, I don't know what I'm on about. So that's why dyspraxia can be difficult in a world which expects instantaneous responses, even though if you were given adequate time, you would be more than capable. What else is there to say about dyspraxia? Yeah, I think dyspraxia again is one of those that goes really commonly with dyslexia. So a lot of people who are diagnosed with dyspraxia are also diagnosed with dyslexia because they're not so different. It's just that the output tends to be this is more physical, where dyslexia is more vocal. But there's always instances where that's not true. So the questions I want to ask you for this is what is your favorite sport? And there are so many people with dyspraxia who are amazing at sports that even have like Olympic medals. So I'm not saying that you are automatically bad at sports, but what I am saying is that it does mean that you'll have bigger barriers to overcome and stronger challenges. So if I was to take a guess without looking, I would say the most popular sports would be ones that are singular, that do not require group participation. And I am right. Swimming, running do not necessarily need someone else. However, all of these can be challenging. Swimming requires a lot of, so when you're moving one arm, you've got to be thinking about the other arm, you've got to be thinking about your legs. And the fact that there's multiple steps in the process means glug, glug, glug. I'm great at the doggy paddle, but doggy paddle's not going to get me an Olympic medal. Running, you can be as fit as a fiddle. Look at me, I'm super skinny, not bragging, but I am physically healthy, but I can't run to save my life. I end up tripping over myself, falling on the floor, chipping a tooth. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Golf is great, but it requires you to have that really good depth perception in order to gauge how hard do I hit it? How far does the ball go? April says, nah, I remember when Chi-Chi from BBC News came to EI office and you showed her the upside down glasses that I think you used to demonstrate dyspraxia and autism. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it can take a while for your eyes to adjust if you have like a new way of seeing the world, but eventually it does get easier. And the most difficult one, or the most least favorable, is football. And you know what? I hear you on that. Football, there's too much going on. So imagine that if you're dyspraxic, the likelihood is you'll find sports more difficult than your peers. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try it, because some people thrive in despite of it, almost like, you know what, I'm going to be great at this. The next one is, how would you answer this question? Honey, does this shirt make me look fat? So how would you answer if someone asked you straight away and didn't give you much time to think? How would you answer? No, you're gorgeous. That's a good answer. No, you're fat. Make you look. No, your fat makes you look fat. A bit. It's not the shirt that decides whether you look fat or not. Yes. Quick and nervous. No. What shirt? You're sexy. No. Speak of something. Great. I find it hard to answer these questions because I worry about offending the person. Yeah, exactly. And the reason why I use this question to relate to dyspraxia is that dyspraxic people aren't insensitive. They aren't able to understand the emotion side of things. But what happens is that the honest answer, if think of it like a flow chart, the honest answer is it's not the shirt. It's you. But your other part of the brain is like, okay, politeness, that's not right. Say, no, you look amazing. But then you're thinking, is that the answer they want to hear? And what's up my relationship to them? Are they a stranger? Should definitely be polite. Are they a close family member? And because there's so many different processes going through the head, what tends to do is you're like, and there's an awkward silence. That's really common with those with dyspraxia. But you may notice that there's a key overlap with autism on this question, because people with autism may struggle with a similar question, but the way that the brain gets to the difficulties is very different. So dyspraxia is a lot of information trying to like piece it together. Autism is more that the brain just doesn't see the social awkwardness or the potential dilemma that this may cause in certain situations. Marta says, do I understand dyspraxia can be a contradiction for car driving? Yeah, just for driving a car, dyspraxia is challenging. I failed more times than I like to admit, to be honest. I still can't drive. But I do know a lot of people with dyspraxia who are great car drivers. It just means that they will have to find an instructor which understands their brain, and you just have to find lots of different amendments. So there's nothing you can't do in life, but it does mean that you might have to put a little bit of extra effort in or find alternative learning styles. Okay. Automatically no, because usually that's what they want to hear. I've learned that script, but if they're a close friend who gets me, I give them a more detailed answer. Very accurate. So that's dyspraxia. Moving on sharply, dyscalculia. Dyscalculia is maths of the dyslexia world, but unlike just being bad at maths, you can't say I have dyscalculia, because that's not it. Where dyslexia is about phonologics and putting the words together, dyscalculia is the same but with numbers and symbols and orders. So in theory, you know how to do times tables. You understand what, like, the principle of pi and diameter, but when it comes to actually executing the results, you might get the wrong answer. So it's not that you're dumb or stupid. You know maths, or you have the potential to learn maths, but you still time and time again might make mistakes. People with dyscalculia may struggle to picture number lines in their head. If you say count backwards from a certain number, they might find it difficult. If you say approximately how long is a meter, you might struggle to picture it in your head. Or if I say do a conversion between centimeters and inches, and you know how much is a roughly, but you still find it difficult to put it in order. For example, for myself, I understand the difference between AM and PM and 24-hour clocks, but I still find it very difficult to tell you the time in a 24-hour clock. Jay said, yes, this is me for sure. Times tables were traumatic. And I think a lot of people who are dyscalculic get diagnosed with dyslexia just because maybe it's easier, maybe it's more people are able to diagnose that, but it really is a thing. It's suspected, to be honest, like every other neurodiverse condition. Now, Einstein had dyscalculia, and because his brain solved maths in a different way to the norm, he was able to find hidden like gaps or patterns that no one else was able to see. So here's a fun one. How many centimeters long is an elephant approximately? So we got 250 centimeters, 500, 400, 500, 300. Okay, we got, if 100 centimeters is a meter, then I can be like maybe 700 centimeters. I don't know how big an elephant is, I've realized. About as many centimeters as an average elephant. That's true. So the answer I got is the average length of an elephant is 5.5 meters, which is approximately 550 centimeters. So any of you who said between 500 to 600-ish, you're correct. Though someone with dyscalculia, for instance, they might know what a centimeter is. They might know roughly that a meter is from what, like your nipple to your arm's length, right? But they might still really struggle to think how high. Or if someone says it's so many meters high, you will not have a clue. But if they say, oh, 2 houses high, you know. So people need like something in real life to ground their estimate of the shape. Jackie says, wow, how did I get 550 centimeters? I don't know. Amazing. I just guessed. Brilliant. So it sounds to me that a lot of you are just very good guesses. I would have put way higher number. Type your 2 times tables backwards from 10. Well, I'll take the... Okay, yeah, the correct answer was 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. Okay. And the reason this, hopefully you're starting to understand dyscalculia a little bit more. It's not that you do not know your 2 times tables, because it's just like it's odd numbers, isn't it? But it's that the brain might take a bit longer to write the answer out, or it might get things confused. So even though you know you can work it out if you had unlimited time, when put on the spot, it can kind of overload the brain, and it's like, never mind. Yeah, and as Jade said, I just do not think in numbers. And that's a really good way of doing it. So if you're dyslexic, you can be dyscalculic. It's just you don't have to be. So remember, a lot of these overlap, but they don't have to. So do not think just because you have one, you automatically have to have another one. It's just that you're more likely to. Autism, brilliant. Autism's a big one. I can never justify autism in a couple of slides, but in a nutshell, it's thinking differently, more dramatically. It's more related to like social skills and how you interpret the world. And I'm going to include Asperger's in this as well, because it is now known as autism spectrum disorder. But know that the spectrum's massive and it's so different for everyone. So I've done this one before in a previous one, but when you look at this image, what is the first thing you saw in it? An old couple, two old people from Paula, older couple staring, two people, an elderly couple, a woman in an arch, singing Mexican, old woman. The politically correct term, is it elderly or is it like older? I never know what's the correct term. Guitarist. But the reason why elderly probably, yeah, the reason why this is related to autism is that the general public will see two older people, but yet other people will see two what seems to be Mexicans sitting together, one playing a guitar, one holding their hat, or another person will see like a cellish, like a cup in the center. And there really isn't a right or wrong answer. And that is the best way I think I describe autism to someone. You may think differently, but if you think differently, it's just different to the mainstream and isn't wrong necessarily. It's just a different type of right. Sounds like I'm talking about alternative facts. I'm not. So these are 100% facts. They're just, you come to the answer in a different route. That's the best way to describe autism. And that's why. So I'm not saying if you saw the older people first or if you saw the people singing first, that one means autism, one doesn't. This is just a simplistic way to explain to you that those with autism will still have very correct answers, but the way that they tell you the answers or the way they kind of frame it might be very different from how you would have seen the world. Surprisingly, or I mean, not surprisingly, this is why organizations are really actively trying to make their organizations autism friendly, because this talent of seeing, being able to spot where's Wally, being able to see the trees from the forest is an amazing skill set if used properly. Okay, Oliver said, see, those mess me up because I know it's not two old people. Like the first thing I saw was a bunch of things that have been arranged in a way so that they think that they look like older people staring at each other. It just makes sense. I know, I see what you mean. It was very obvious that it was a lot going on. You know, the one where you kind of got a duck, but if you turn it, it's a bunny rabbit, or if you've got a horse and you turn it, it's a frog. They are purposely meant to confuse you, but this is more to give you a visual illustration or what it could be like to have autism, or think of it very broadly. I'm sure you all can appreciate this isn't a direct science, and a lot of the time it's about not knowing that you may not always know exactly why you do what you do, but understand that communicating it to others is probably the biggest bit of support you can actually do, like give someone. Finally, the cup, guitar, sombrero, yeah, cool. Yeah, I got into those visual illusions too, open-minded. I see nothing until I see someone say something or analyze pieces. Yeah. Do you ever get it though, when you see something and the second someone tells you what they see, you can't unsee it, and then you can't see what you saw again? I do that all the time. All right, Mona Lisa. What do the facial expressions of the Mona Lisa tell us about how she is feeling? I've used this one again, but I think it's a great example. So looking at her emotions, what is the emotion that she is portraying? I remember we're relating this to autism at the moment. Shy, not a lot, egomatic. I can't pronounce that, but I know what you mean. It's hard to tell if she's happy or sad, knowing, fed up, pride. Yeah, I could see that. She's just smiling, posing for the artist. Yeah, nothing. I just see a strange smile, neutral, observing. Smile equals happy, though could be less than that. I think she looks like she knows a secret. Expressionist. Trying to look polite. She looks like she's away with something mischievous. Yeah. And how does this relate to autism? I hear you ask. Well, with autism, it can be quite difficult to understand nuances in expressions. Think of like micro expressions. So I'm not saying, happy, sad, of course, most people know those. It's the subtle things like the little twitch of the eyebrow, a smile. Maybe when you've offended someone and it's clear to everyone else that they're offended, but you don't pick up on it. That's something which is very common with autism. So if you have social skills which seem to continuously get you in trouble or kind of unfortunately alienate people sometimes, that could be a sign of ASD. Not always, but it doesn't mean you're rude, it doesn't mean you're impolite. It just means that the signals or the expressions which a lot of people are able to absorb, you might find more challenging. And the Mona Lisa is a great example because most of the world doesn't know what she's thinking. But imagine if everyone in your entire life was like the Mona Lisa, like a cryptic puzzle that you can only take a guess, and that guess isn't always very accurate. Alex says that happens loads, especially more in the past. Gina, I find it hard to interpret feelings. Yeah, a lot of you will resonate with this. And remember, the autistic spectrum, it goes from people who are like non-verbal, who struggle to communicate at all, to those who you would have no idea whatsoever. Like I'm on the spectrum, and yet unless you spend a lot of time with me, you wouldn't have a clue. So remember, it's all over the place. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And while I'll tell you more about it while you answer this question. So I want you to write an idea for a pointless invention. ADHD can be about struggling to have attention, so the mind easily wandering, and it also can be hyperactive, so you're struggling to sit still in one place at a time. But know that these can be very different. So the reason why I asked you to do a pointless invention is a lot of people with ADHD tend to be great at coming up with ideas, but might struggle with the execution because they're always like, they just stop being interested. Like, okay, space microphone, that sounds amazing. And then as soon as you start making it, you're like, what about a dissolving tea bag? And then you kind of like swap projects. It doesn't always have to be hyperactive. So remember, if you really struggle with attention, but you're quite a somber, quite a mellow person, you could still have ADHD. It doesn't have to be hyperactive. Okay, a cup that spills its content, an app that stores pictures all over your clothing items so that you can use it down time to plan your outfits. That'd be useful. A hair scratcher, self-exploding website, nice. A long stick that allows you to change channels on the TV. Perfect. And it can also be very difficult with ADHD to do organizing. Prioritizing is a skill which can be particularly difficult. But bear in mind that all these things we all struggle with. It's just if you struggle with them more than others and you struggle with them for a prolonged period of time, typically 6 months or a year plus, that's when you might want to explore something like ADHD rather than just being, human. So we've got rank your daily tasks by priorities. So these are the order that you would do these tasks. And the truth is, there isn't a correct answer, but having all these options can be quite overwhelming, and it might just be easier not to answer all at all. Oliver said, meanwhile, my brain is panicking like, what does pointless mean here? These things I can do, but they take time. Coming up with one or the like fly on the fly is impossible. There's so many possibilities flying around in my mind, and I don't know what the right answer is. Yes, Oliver, that's a great example of a characteristic of ADHD. It's like your brain might get focused on one word, and then it's unable to like take the rest in consideration because it's kind of gridlocked on one area. Yes, and some of the pointlessness can be turned to activities having a point. Yeah. I mean, there's pros and cons to neurodiversity. I'm not here to say it's a massive superpower, but I'm also saying it's not a massive disadvantage. I think it really depends on the situations and the environments that you find yourself in. So that is a very common one for ADHD. And just so you know, ADHD and autism go together really common, as well as dyspraxia and ADHD. I believe that combination is called DAMP, which is a lovely word. Okay, dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is less commonly known, but it's essentially dyslexia, but more kind of particular. So where dyslexia is about reading, dysgraphia is about writing. And it normally is demonstrated by bad handwriting, but it's not bad handwriting. Bad handwriting is a result or a consequence, or an output from being dysgraphic. But it's that the brain gets confused between, drawing images and writing are actually different parts of the brain, or at least that's what the research says. And it can get kind of confused. It's that you might grip the pen too tight and you're not able to change the grip depending on if you're using paper or wood or something else. It can also be that when you're writing, you miss out things quite a lot. So on here, you can rate how likely you miss out things. So maybe you know how to write, but you're always missing out punctuation. Or maybe when you're writing, you'll miss out the odd word, even though in your head, you're saying the word. So the cat jumped over the box, the cat over the box, and you missed out the word jump. Letters, capital letters. And remember, with all these things, it does not relate to intelligence. So you do know that you need a capital letter at the start of a word and you need a full stop at the end, but you still miss it out because the brain just not important and just carries on. Gina says, used to write my name Angie, but I'm Gina. My handwriting was always an issue. Yeah, my full name's Nathaniel. Try learning that when you're 4 or 5. Not happening. I add mysterious capital letters. Yeah, I find it easier to write in capital letters, and joined up handwriting, forget about it. In school, we were forced to do joined up handwriting, and my handwriting was terrible. The second I started writing in capitals, suddenly it was eligible and people could actually make it out. Jade says, I hold a pencil like a savage at the first meal in weeks. Yeah, I look like I'm going to stab someone. It's why are you holding it that way? But yeah, these are common signs of dysgraphia. People with dysgraphia can also struggle with activities like using scissors. So maybe you're always say, cutting a straight line. Oh dear, you've cut your ear off. Or doing a zipper up and trying to use one hand and the other hand together. Here really overlaps with dyspraxia because you're using one hand and another hand. And apparently, one side of the brain makes the other arm work and the other side does the other arm. Again, I'm not an expert in that area, but it is interesting to know that the brain uses different areas to control different parts of your body. A water balloon, or if you ever tied up a balloon, tying knots or buttons, to this day, I struggle with buttons. I cannot do buttons one-handed. Oliver said, this is a very specific example, but I also speak German. Writing the language is impossible to me. There's so many words that should be capitalized, and I always forget those capital letters. Yeah, swapping between languages is a really common one. Apparently, Agatha Christie, the famous writer, was dysgraphic. My son is very lucky. He has been able to write his 4-letter name since he was about 4.5. Nice. I think I'm going to have to give my kid a really short name. Just don't want to be cruel to him anymore. OCD. OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. And unlike the others, OCD is a mental health condition, but it's also a neurodiverse condition. It's one of those ones that overlap. And it's because OCD doesn't have to be a disability, but it is more than it isn't. So you're more the people who do suffer from OCD, it is debilitating. It's obsessive compulsive disorder. So you obsessing, meaning, for instance, you're thinking about something consistently, and compulsive, you have to do something about it. So it's not just worrying. It's not just wanting to clean. It's not just, making sure all your shoes are in a nice order. It's thinking it and physically having to do something about it. Otherwise, you just get really tense or unable to move on. It's not related to cleanliness. That's one output. It could be about health, worrying about your health conditions. It could be worried about the neatness. It could be about how you're obsessing over a conversation you had and you have to email someone or you have to text them to clarify that everything's okay. It's that ability to not allow something to drop. Interesting that my son can't use scissors. He's 21 and struggles to write. He's not been diagnosed with dysgraphia, but it sounds like him. He's just finished uni. That's it's very common. It's one of those ones that get undiagnosed, so common. I'm right-handed, but yeah, I also do a lot of things left-handed, like eating my knife with knife and fork, archery, things like that. People with Dysgraphia and Dyspraxia tend to be more likely to be left-handed. Yeah. All right, this one. What do you spend your most time obsessing on? Being neat, danger, forgetting things. And I want to make it crystal clear that this is all completely normal. None of these make you have OCD. It's having these and the ability to not rectify the danger, the neatness, the forgetting things interferes with your life. So say you leave the house and you're like, did I leave the fridge door open? And it bothers you so much, you have like a breakdown in your head. That might be OCD. But if you're just like, did I forget about it? That's probably not. Danger. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you should be cared about danger. I can't think straight sometimes if I wash my left arm before my right arm. Yeah, sometimes when I'm walking on a road and if I see a square, I have to stop on it. Or there's like get a post in my garden, and every time I walk past it, I have to touch it. And it's kind of become a ritual. And if I do not touch it, I can get on with my life, but I do get a bit like agitated. And for some people, that agitation will be far too much and I'll have to run back and touch it. Other people can just move on. Strong preference. Yeah, brilliant. And here is just how much do you compulse over the following. So some people could have compulsions when it comes to shopping or spending money. They know spending money in large quantity is bad, but they can't help it. It could also be with gambling. So unfortunately, ADHD, OCD are closely related, as well as Tourette's, and gambling does tend to be something that a lot of individuals struggle with. Hoarding is another one. You know what? So I'm not a hoarder, but I've definitely been accused of it sometime. But some people it's very debilitating. Yeah, danger is exciting, but not going to promote that today. Hyperlexia. All right, this is a great one. I bet the vast majority of you have never heard of hyperlexia. Hyperlexia is only really studied in children, but essentially, if any of you were mini geniuses when you were children or your children, and you were able to read or write or coordinate at a far more advanced level at a younger age than your peers, that's hyperlexia. So it's kind of like the opposite of dyslexia. It's that you're, rather than being more delayed than your peers, you're actually more advanced. Now, this advancement does tend to ease up the older you get. So I'm not saying you stay a genius forever, but you might start off life with a adaptability to learn and progress. Yeah, it is a lot of words. Just remember hyper, like woohoo, hyper, extra great, and lexia, meaning to read, lexicon. I wouldn't suspect many of you have hyperlexia, and if you do, it's probably not going to put you back. But the reason why it's worth mentioning is there is a very strong link between autism and hyperlexia. So autism, people say, oh, the genius gene. A lot of people with autism tend to be amazing in one areas. And some of those characteristics start off very young in life. So this is kind of a hybrid between dyslexia and autism. Sometimes it doesn't always work out as great as being advanced at a young age, but in other times it does. I wish I was hyperlexic, but I'm not so sure I was. On this one is how you'd rate your social skills. So typically with hyperlexia, you may be advanced in certain areas, but it will not be all areas. So for instance, you could still struggle with communication, relationship management, active listening. Yet, for instance, I know a child at the moment, my godson actually, who is amazing at puzzles. Like I think he's only 3 or something, and he can do like 500-piece puzzles like that really quick. But he doesn't talk. He hasn't been able to develop that part of his background. So that's an example of something which might be considered a characteristic of hyperlexia. Jackie says, my 4-year-old son has been diagnosed on the spectrum. He can already write and read like a 5-year-old, so maybe he is hyperlexic too. Yeah, I mean, I can't promise you, but those things, they do overlap very heavily. Tourette's. Tourette's is Tourette syndrome, and this is about tics. It's not about swearing. So if you're a potty mouth or a sailor, not Tourette's. But if you're someone who might just start to say words like or movements, it could be Tourette's. So for instance here, maybe you grunt all the time, or throat clearing, or whistling, or coughing, or click. And doing it once or twice isn't Tourette's. But if you have it and there's this compulsion, and if you do not do it, it kind of hurts you or kind of like makes you stressed, like OCD, but physical OCD, that could be Tourette's. It's a physical reaction, be it vocal or, moving your hands, which you cannot help. So think about it. We all do it, but can you help it? Think of it like sneezing or blinking. We do it without even thinking. But those kind of it's like even with clicking or coughing, you just can't help it. Clicking knuckles, etc. It hurts, but don't do it. Yeah, it's that type of thing. And remember, it's a spectrum, but it becomes a disorder when it interferes with your day-to-day life. So if you're someone who clicks your knuckles all the time, that could be a habit. But if you're someone who does it all time to the point where you can't even sit still in a meeting, then that might be a form of Tourette's, for example. I really don't want you all to walk away with like a whole new badge of things you've been diagnosed with. It's more about having a think and understanding that some of the things that help people with Tourette's may help you, even if you've only got a diagnosis of ADHD, for example. You don't need to have a diagnosis in it, but what you do need to know is that if you resonate with some of these things, then looking for support in that area might be really beneficial. Those are more physical tics, so blinking, eye rolling, grimacing, which is like screwing up your face, shoulder shrugging. The main thing I wanted to take you away on this is that it's not swearing. Swearing is just one small percentage of those with Tourette's. The vast majority will have other tics that are either vocal or physical. Yeah, Alex, you have blinking really bad. Oh, and quickly, my Meares-Irlen Syndrome is very closely related to dyslexia, and it's about having difficulty with contrast. So if you've ever seen people with glasses that are like tinted different colors or use different colored sheets, like Amit, oh, you can't see, but like this, that's because visual stress is when looking at something can cause a lot of stress and headaches, but it doesn't relate to having poor eye quality. So you might not even need glasses for visuals, but you might still have stress when looking at black and white or screens. It's kind of hard to get diagnosed with this, but if you're interested in it, try researching visual dyslexia or visual stress. And it's quite common for those of you who have this syndrome to confuse D's and G's, I's and 1's, B's and D's. And the best thing you can do is there's different fonts out there, but there's a font called Dyslexia font, which, you know what, isn't my cup of tea, but for some people it really helps. And it's because the letters are more weighted at the bottom, and it makes every single word look different. If they look too similar, your brain doesn't care. It's just going to read it as the same thing. So yeah, Alex said, well, we got, is that I or what, one and an exclamation mark? They all look the same. Yeah, I actually tell myself I don't have to do it, and I feel like I'm holding my breath and just have to, yeah. This is a real extreme example. The words are blurry, but it's not because you have poor eyes. It's because of the contrast, and it kind of tricks the eyes up. Think of it like a zebra and a lion. Zebras have black and white stripes, and lions really struggle to see them, basically. It's like an optical illusion. Does anyone else struggle with hardcore writing a number 5 and question marks? Yes, certain numbers and certain people. I know someone who can write everything apart from the number 5 every time. They just really struggle with it. And other conditions which are considered or starting to be considered as neurodiverse are schizophrenia, which is a mental health issue, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, dissociative disorder, and bipolar disorder. But these are ones that often get thrown around with the label neurodiverse. So as that's the end of today, if there's any questions, say them now or forever hold your peace. But we're delivering sessions like this every single week. And this was a very, very general one, just the tip of the iceberg, but our other ones are far more detailed. Yes, thank you so much, Nat. I like that. April, thank you again. Okay, brilliant. And to get in touch, here's our details. My name's Nat, just nat@accept.co.uk. Well, thank you everyone so much. And I really look forward to seeing you all again.
Thank you, Nat.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Nat. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.